The hospital lobby was alive with the hum of a bustling afternoon. Nurses moved swiftly through the hallways, their crisp white uniforms ablare as they attended to patients. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the low murmur of voices, some anxious, others exhausted. Through the glass entrance doors, an elderly man shuffled inside, his frail body barely holding itself together. His clothes, tattered and stained with the hardships of life, hung loosely over his thin frame. His breathing was labored, each step a struggle. He clutched his chest, pain etched across his wrinkled face. People in the waiting area turned to glance at him, some with mild concern, others with detached curiosity. But no one moved. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly manicured nails, eyed him skeptically as he approached the desk. "Please," he rasped, his voice trembling with urgency. "I need a doctor." The receptionist barely concealed her disinterest. With a sigh, she leaned forward and asked flatly, "Do you have insurance or the ability to pay for treatment?" The old man's lips quivered. He hesitated before shaking his head. I don't. I just need help." Her expression hardened, and she muttered under her breath, "Another one." Without further acknowledgement, she turned back to her computer screen, tapping at the keyboard as if he no longer existed. Moments later, a doctor emerged from an office nearby. He was middle-aged, his white coat pristine, and his presence commanding. His eyes flicked to the old man, who now gripped the edge of the reception desk for support. "Doctor, please," the man pleaded. I think I'm having a heart attack." The doctor glanced at the receptionist, who gave him a knowing look, then back at the old man. His expression remained cold, clinical. "This is a private hospital," he stated, his tone devoid of sympathy. "We don't offer treatment without payment. If you cannot afford care, I suggest you go to a government hospital." A pained gasp escaped the elderly man's lips as his body trembled. He tried to steady himself, but his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the tiled floor. A few gasps rippled through the waiting room. Some people reached for their phones, not to help, but to record. As the old man clutched his chest, struggling for air, the automatic doors of the hospital whooshed open again. A tall figure in a black jacket and worn jeans stepped inside, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. The air seemed to shift as he took in the scene. His eyes locked onto the frail man writhing on the floor. Without hesitation, the newcomer rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside him. "Hang in there," he said gently, placing a steady hand on the old man's shoulder. "I'm here. You're not alone." It was only then that the onlookers took a closer look at the Good Samaritan. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" Keanu Reeves barely acknowledged the hushed murmurs rippling through the crowd. His focus remained solely on the frail man before him. His brows knitted in concern as he took in the man's pale complexion, the beads of sweat gathering on his forehead, the way his chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic breaths. "We need a doctor." "Now," Keanu said, his voice firm but controlled. The receptionist hesitated, glancing at the physician who had coldly dismissed the old man moments earlier. The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples as if dealing with an inconvenience. "As I explained," he said, his tone edged with irritation, "this hospital does not provide free treatment. He can go elsewhere." Keanu slowly stood, his piercing gaze locking onto the doctor's. The usual warmth in his eyes had been replaced with something else, something sharper, unyielding. "Are you saying a human life is less valuable than money?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. The doctor shifted uncomfortably but remained stubborn. It's not about value, sir. It's about hospital policy. We're not a charity. Keanu exhaled through his nose, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Then, without another word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, retrieved a thick stack of $100 bills, and held them out. "How much will it take for you to do your job?" he asked. The doctor hesitated, thrown off by the directness of the question. "Well, the initial deposit is $5,000, he stammered. Keanu didn't even blink. He pulled out more cash and handed over $10,000 instead. "Make sure he gets the best possible care." A heavy silence fell over the room. The doctor, momentarily stunned, took the money, signaling for a team of nurses to take action. Almost immediately, the energy in the hospital shifted. The once indifferent medical staff now moved with urgency, lifting the old man onto a stretcher and rushing him toward the emergency ward. As the old man was wheeled away, his frail hand weakly reached out. Keanu grasped it gently, offering him a reassuring squeeze. "Thank you," the man whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't even know your name." Keanu smiled faintly. "That doesn't matter. Just focus on getting better." The sincerity in his voice left the old man momentarily speechless. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Keanu watched as the stretcher disappeared behind the double doors of the emergency unit. He crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw tightening as he glanced back at the doctor, who now looked noticeably uneasy. "If he had died because you refused to help him," Keanu said, his voice even but firm, "how would you have lived with that?" The doctor swallowed hard, looking away. The once arrogant certainty in his posture had begun to waver. Meanwhile, the people in the lobby, those who had initially just watched, their phones still clutched in their hands, now exchanged guilty glances. The receptionist, who had so easily dismissed the man earlier, shifted awkwardly in her seat. The moment had changed something. But Keanu wasn't looking for praise or recognition. As the hospital buzzed with renewed activity, he simply leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting for news on the old man's condition. Because for him, this wasn't about making a statement. It was about doing what was right. Time passed slowly as Keanu remained in the waiting area, his presence a quiet but powerful reminder of the events that had just unfolded. The whispers hadn't stopped. Hospital staff and patients alike continued stealing glances at him, still in disbelief. "Is it really him?" someone murmured. "I can't believe what just happened." Who does something like that for a stranger? Keanu, however, ignored the growing attention. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the man fighting for his life beyond those cold emergency room doors. After what felt like an eternity, the same doctor emerged, his demeanor noticeably changed. Gone was the aloof arrogance. Now, there was something akin to guilt in his expression. He cleared his throat before speaking. "The patient is stable for now," he said. "We've managed to stabilize his heart rate, but he was dangerously close to going into full cardiac arrest. Had he arrived any later, the doctor trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He looked up, finally meeting Keanu's gaze. If treatment had been delayed any longer, he might not have made it. Keanu's jaw tightened. "Then it's good we didn't waste any more time, isn't it?" The doctor nodded stiffly, his face tinged with regret. Without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the ward. A few minutes later, a nurse approached Keanu with a warm smile. "The patient keeps asking for you," she said. "He wants to thank you properly." Keanu hesitated for a moment, then nodded, following her through the dimly lit hospital corridors. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, the occasional beep of machines filling the otherwise hushed atmosphere. When he stepped into the recovery room, the old man lay propped up in bed, fours attached to his frail arms. Despite his weakened state, his face brightened when he saw Keanu. You really came," the man rasped, his voice raw from exhaustion. I don't know how to thank you." Keanu pulled up a chair beside the bed and shook his head. "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "Just focus on getting better." The old man's eyes welled with emotion. "You saved my life," he whispered. "And you didn't even know me." Keanu sighed, leaning forward slightly. "We don't need to know someone to help them," he said. "You've lived your life. You've given something to this world. That should mean something." A deep silence settled between them. The old man blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. "I used to be a teacher," he admitted after a pause. "For most of my life, I taught kids how to read, how to believe in themselves. But after I retired, things got bad. I was scammed out of my savings, lost my home. I had no one left." His voice cracked. "And today, I thought I was going to die alone." Keanu's expression softened. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. The old man swallowed hard, unable to speak for a moment. He turned his gaze toward the small window, where the city lights flickered in the distance. "I don't know how to repay you," he whispered. Keanu offered a small smile. "You don't owe me anything. But if you ever get the chance, pass the kindness forward." The weight of those words hung in the air, settling deep into the old man's heart. Unbeknownst to either of them, the story of Keanu's act of kindness had already begun to spread beyond the hospital walls. A staff member, moved by what they had witnessed, had secretly recorded part of the interaction and shared it online. Within hours, the video went viral. People across the world watched in awe as Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star, the millionaire actor, had knelt beside a dying stranger and ensured he got the care he deserved. Comments flooded social media. "Keanu Reeves is the kind of person we should all strive to be. Why are hospitals still turning people away because they're poor? Money shouldn't decide who lives and who dies." Headlines soon followed. "Keanu Reeves saves elderly man after hospital refuses to help." "Hollywood's kindest actor strikes again, a lesson in compassion." Yet, as the world erupted in admiration, Keanu remained blissfully unaware. He wasn't in this for the attention. He was simply doing what was right. Over the next few days, Keanu remained a quiet presence at the hospital, checking in on the elderly man between his other commitments. Despite the hustle and bustle of his own life, he made sure the man had everything he needed: medication, meals, and, most importantly, a reason to keep fighting. Slowly but surely, the man's health began to improve. His once pale complexion regained some color, his frail hands grew steadier, and the haunted look in his eyes faded bit by bit. One morning, as Keanu entered the room, he found the old man sitting upright, a tray of untouched food on his lap. He was staring out the window, lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" Keanu asked as he sat down beside him. The man sighed, shaking his head. "I keep wondering, why me?" He turned to Keanu, his brows furrowed. "Out of all the people in this city, why did you stop to help me?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "Because someone had to," he said simply. "And because I could." The old man swallowed hard, his throat tightening with emotion. "Most people wouldn't have." Keanu exhaled, glancing down at his hands. "The world isn't perfect." It's easy to look away, to pretend suffering doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean we should. He met the man's gaze. You spent your life helping kids believe in themselves. That matters. You matter. The man's lips trembled, and for a moment, he had no words. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He flipped it open, revealing a page filled with neatly written notes. I've been making arrangements, he said. When you're discharged, you won't have to go back to the streets. I've rented an apartment for you, not far from here. It's not much, but it's a start. The old man's eyes widened. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Keanu smiled, setting the notebook on the table. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Tears welled up in the old man's eyes. For so long, he had been invisible to the world. And now, sitting before him was a stranger. No, a friend, who saw him, who refused to let him fade away. I don't know how to thank you, he whispered. Keanu placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then don't. Just get better. Meanwhile, beyond the hospital walls, the story of Keanu's kindness continued to spread. The video had gained millions of views overnight, and news outlets scrambled to cover the story. But Keanu didn't care about the attention. He wasn't interested in interviews or praise. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered, ensuring that the old man had a future. As the day of discharge approached, hospital staff, many of whom had been humbled by Keanu's actions, gathered to bid farewell. Some of them had even started treating patients differently, making sure no one else suffered the same neglect. The doctor who had initially refused to help stood in the background, his face solemn. He had spent the past few days reflecting on his choices, grappling with the shame of his inaction. Before the old man was wheeled out, the doctor finally stepped forward. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Sir, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice hesitant. I should have helped you when you first came in. I was wrong. The elderly man studied him for a long moment before nodding. I hope you'll help the next person who walks through those doors, he said quietly. The doctor swallowed hard and nodded back. I will. Keanu watched the exchange in silence, a small smile playing on his lips. It wasn't just about saving one life. It was about changing perspectives. As they stepped outside, a small crowd had gathered. Some were reporters, others were simply people moved by the story. Keanu ignored the flashing cameras, focusing on helping the old man into the car waiting for him. As they drove toward the new apartment, the elderly man turned to Keanu. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? Keanu chuckled softly. Because this was never about me. He glanced out the window, watching the city pass by. It's about showing that kindness still exists. The old man nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling deep within him. And as they reached the apartment, a modest but comfortable space with a stocked kitchen, fresh linens, and a small bookshelf, the man realized something. For the first time in years, he felt safe. Keanu clapped a hand on his shoulder. This is just the beginning, he said. Take your time. Heal. And when you're ready, pass the kindness forward. The old man smiled through his tears, his heart full of gratitude. And in that moment, he knew his life had been changed forever. Days turned into weeks, and the old man slowly began to rebuild his life. At first, it felt strange, waking up in a bed that was his, with clean clothes folded neatly on a chair beside it, with food in the fridge that he didn't have to beg for. Every morning, he would sit by the small window of his apartment, watching the world outside, reflecting on how close he had come to losing everything. But he hadn't. Because someone had chosen to see him, to care. Keanu kept in touch, checking in on him regularly. He never treated it like an obligation. He was simply there, a steady presence in the old man's life. Sometimes they talked about books, sometimes about the past, and sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence. One day, as Keanu arrived for a visit, he found the old man pacing slowly around the apartment, gripping the back of a chair for support. It was the first time he had seen him move so steadily. "You're getting stronger," Keanu noted with a grin. The old man chuckled, nodding. "Feels like I've been given a second life." He hesitated before adding, "I want to do something with it." Keanu raised an eyebrow, curious. "Like what?" The old man exhaled, his fingers tapping lightly on the chair's edge. "I used to be a teacher," he said. "I spent my life helping kids. And now, I think I'd like to do that again." Keanu's face lit up. "That's a great idea." With Keanu's help, the man connected with a local community center that ran free educational programs for underprivileged children. At first, he was nervous. What if he had nothing left to give? But the moment he stepped into that small classroom, something inside him reignited. Teaching had always been his passion, and as he sat with the children, helping them with their lessons, he felt something he hadn't in years: purpose. The kids adored him. They listened intently as he shared stories, encouraged them to dream big, and reminded them that knowledge was their greatest tool. One afternoon, after a long session, a little girl tugged at his sleeve. "Mister," she said, her big brown eyes full of curiosity, "why do you help us?" The old man smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. "Because someone helped me when I needed it most," he said. The words felt right. They felt true. And at that moment, he understood. He wasn't just living for himself anymore. He was living to pass on the kindness he had received. Meanwhile, the world had not forgotten what Keanu had done. The story had continued spreading, inspiring thousands. People started sharing their own experiences, stories of strangers who had helped them, moments of kindness that had changed their lives. It wasn't about fame or celebrity anymore. It was about reminding people that compassion still existed. Hospitals across the country faced public pressure to revise their policies on refusing treatment to the uninsured. Charities and non-profit organizations saw a surge in donations, as people who had been moved by Keanu's actions sought ways to make a difference themselves. The impact was real. And yet, Keanu remained the same: humble, quiet, uninterested in the spotlight. When a journalist finally caught up with him outside a film set and asked why he had gone to such lengths for a stranger, Keanu's answer was simple: "Because kindness doesn't need a reason." And with that, he walked away, leaving the world once again in awe, not just of the actor, but of the man. As the months passed, the old man flourished. His health stabilized, his spirit revived, and he found joy in teaching again. He never forgot what Keanu had done for him, but more importantly, he understood what Keanu had meant when he had said, "Pass the kindness forward." Because that's exactly what he was doing. And maybe, just maybe, one day, one of the children he taught would do the same for someone else. Because sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to set off a chain reaction that changes the world.